Yep, it has started.
Okay, awesome. Yes, welcome everyone to ISKCON of Silicon Valley's online Wednesday class. This is a class we have every Wednesday online in an online format, and we also meet in person at the temple on Saturdays and Sundays. So please come by if you're able to. Maybe we can start with Jai Radha Madhav.
Okay, let me share my screen.
Sure.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare. Shri Radha Madhav Ki Jai. And then next, maybe we can go into a Mangalacharana. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, awesome. I can maybe take over the screen share. Let me move around some screens quickly and have. Okay, share screen. Awesome. Okay, Hare Krishna, everybody. My name is Yogadisha. The topic I'll be discussing today is dig for determination and ditch deviant desires. The focus will be from the Bhagavad Gita, verse chapter 6 and verse 24. And the overall goal I'd like to go with is we'll go through the verse, cover the translation, cover a few points from it, and then break down the translation into two different parts and kind of dig deeper into both of them. So before I start, though, I'd like to offer my respectful obeisances unto my spiritual master, to all the acharyas that came before me, and to all those that walked this path before I did. It is ultimately because of their kindness, their mercy, their compassion that I have access to any of this information, and that I'm able to even be here at this point in time today. So I'm very grateful for them, and I hope that they can bless me in my endeavor, and I can learn something along with everyone else, hopefully. So with that, maybe we can get started. So first we can start with going through the verse itself. So I'll switch over to Veda base. This is, chapter 6, verse 24. We can start with the Sanskrit. Sa nishchayena yoktavyo yogo nirvinna chetasa sankalpa prabhavan kamam svaktva sarvana sheshata manasevendriya gramam viniyamya samantataha. Maybe I can go through it one more time. So, sanishchayena yoktavyo yogo nirvinna chetasa sankalpa prabhavan kamams bhaktva sarvana sheshata manasevendriya gramam viniyamya samantata. Next, we can go through the word by word, each of the word-to-word translations. So first we have saha, which means that. Nishchayena, which means with firm determination. Yoktavya, which means must be practiced. Yogaha is yoga system. Anirvinna chetasa, without deviation. Sankalpa, mental speculations. Prabhavan, born of. Kaman, material desires. Bhaktva, giving up. Sarvan, all. Asheshataha, completely. Manasa, by the mind. Eva, certainly. Indriya gramam, this full set of senses. Viniyamya, regulating. And samantataha, from all sides. So the translation goes, one should engage oneself in the practice of yoga with determination and faith, and not be deviated from the path. One should abandon without exception all material desires born from mental speculation, and thus control all the senses on all sides by the mind. Okay, we can go into the purport by Srila Prabhupada. The yoga practitioner should be determined and should patiently prosecute the practice without deviation. One should be sure of success at the end and pursue this course with great perseverance, not becoming discouraged if there is any delay in the attainment of success. Success is sure for the rigid practitioner. Regarding Bhakti Yoga, Rupa Goswami says, Utsahan nishchayat dhairyat tat tat karma pravartanat sangatyagat sato vritte shadbhir bhakti prasidhyati. One can execute the process of Bhakti Yoga successfully with full-hearted enthusiasm, perseverance, and determination by following the prescribed duties in the association of devotees and by engaging completely in the activities of goodness. This is the third verse of the Upadeshamrita. As for determination, one should follow the example of the sparrow who lost her eggs in the waves of the ocean. A sparrow laid her eggs on the shore of the ocean, but the big ocean carried away the eggs on its waves. The sparrow became very upset and asked the ocean to return her eggs. The ocean did not even consider her appeal, so the sparrow decided to dry up the ocean. She began to pick out the water in her small beak, and everyone laughed at her for her impossible determination. The news of her activity spread, and at last Garuda, the gigantic bird carrier of Lord Vishnu, heard it. He became compassionate toward his small sister bird, and so he came to see the sparrow. Garuda was very pleased by the determination of the small sparrow, and he promised to help. Thus Garuda at once asked the ocean to return her eggs, lest he himself take up the work of the sparrow. The ocean was frightened at this, and returned the eggs. Thus the sparrow became happy by the grace of Garuda. Similarly, in the practice of yoga, especially Bhakti Yoga and Krishna consciousness, may appear to be similar to the practice of yoga, especially Bhakti Yoga and Krishna consciousness, may appear to be a very difficult job. But if anyone follows the principles with great determination, the Lord will surely help, for God helps those who help themselves. Okay, I'll switch back to this presentation. The first thing I was hoping to do is maybe dig a little bit into the translation just to get some idea of what the verse is talking about. Just touch upon a few words I noticed that were interesting. The first word I wanted to point out was nishchayena. Prabhupada translates this as firm determination. And in the purport, he also mentioned utsahan nishchayadhyaya. This is from the Yogadisha. And that verse describes 6 processes that are very conducive and favorable for bhakti. And so in that verse, there's also nishchayad, which means determination. And so this word is it's very similar to what we have in our verse, nishchayena and nishchayad. And so both have this idea of firm determination. Then there's also the Sanskrit words anirvina chetasa. That means without deviation. And that manifests itself in the translation as the last part here, and not to be deviated from the path. And then additionally, we saw in the example in the purport of the sparrow in the story was said to have impossible determination. And so these 3 points I'm bringing up, nishchayena, meaning firm determination, without deviation, impossible determination, these are all not just ordinary determination. They're all emphasizing something deeper, something stronger. And so in this first part of the presentation, where I would hope to focus on the first part of the translation, the bolded part on screen, one should engage oneself in the practice of yoga with determination and faith, and not be deviated from the path. The point I'd like to make is that there's something stronger that's being mentioned here. It's not some ordinary determination. It's not something simple. It's something a bit deeper. And so first we'll maybe explore this idea a bit more, expand it. But I can start off with a simple example. It's actually of me and my parents. So when my parents first came to the US, they came from India, and they didn't necessarily have a lot of money with them. They came for a better life. My dad found a job, but he had many responsibilities. And the pay wasn't necessarily the greatest, as fancy as we might see in the Bay Area today. But still, he had to take care of all his responsibilities. He had a wife. My sister was already born. I wasn't born yet. But they had to pay the rent for an apartment. And they also had to send money back to India to help take care of the family there. And so he had all these responsibilities he had to manage. And so naturally he cultivated this mindset, okay, that I have to save money. We have to be responsible with how we spend money. And in this way, they were able to slowly make progress with their lives, and they are where they are today. Now, naturally, once I was born, they taught me the same principle. Okay, it's important to save money. It's important to be wise with how you spend. Don't be spending money casually. Don't be spending it on random things. And so I also, from their example and from their teachings, learned this principle. Okay, that I have to also save money. But there's still a subtle difference between my parents' mindset when it comes to saving money and their wisdom with that and my level of understanding. And the difference is because they were in a situation where they had to. It was a matter of life and death to a certain degree. Like they had to save money, whereas I, after their hard work, have lived under their comfort. And so even though I might try to save money, I have a bit more of a wiggle room than they did. And so this distinction here that I'm bringing up between my parents' ability to save money and the effort I have to make is the difference here is the same difference in this determination. The determination I might have to save money is a bit more ordinary, whereas when they first came to the US, the determination they had was a bit stronger. And so we'll explore what this idea is of this stronger determination a bit more. But maybe we can start with something simple first. Just understanding what determination is, maybe taking a simple dictionary definition. The definitions that you see on screen, they're from Merriam-Webster. So the act of deciding definitely and firmly, or to be firm or fixed with intention to achieve a desired end. And so these are, casual definitions. A student might be determined to go to a certain school. An employee might be determined to get a promotion. And determination is also very important to bhakti, in two ways, actually, in particular. When you have determination, it helps you overcome different challenges. Maybe the first time you're chanting 16 rounds, when you have to do fasting for certain festival days, or maybe just determination in continuing to work through challenges that might come up in different interpersonal relationships between other devotees, between family members, etc. And in addition to helping you overcome challenges, determination also allows you to have many firsts or many new experiences, like giving a class for the first time, or maybe talking to the general public about Krishna consciousness, about your practice, like many devotees do while on book distribution. All of these are done as a result of these definitions given by determination, having that fixed desire, having that intention to achieve an end. Our scriptures also have many examples of devotees who are stout in determination. And maybe it's nice to go through an example of one. The classic example that comes to my mind is Sri Dhruva Maharaj. Many of you know the story or his pastime, but I can go through it for anyone who might not. So Dhruva Maharaj had a father whose name was Uttanapad. The father, the king, he had two wives. One was named Suruchi and one was named Suniti. Of those two wives, Suruchi was much more dear to Uttanapad than Suniti. And the easy way to remember that is that Suruchi was more ruchi towards Uttanapad. Uttanapad had more ruchi for Suruchi. So now Suruchi had a son whose name was Uttam. And Suniti also had a son who was Dhruva Maharaj. So that kind of sets the scene of who we're dealing with here. And one day, Uttama was sitting on his father's laps, the king's lap, and Dhruva Maharaj saw this, and he wanted to do so too. This is a natural desire. He's a 5-year-old boy, saw his father's lap, and thought, hey, why not? I can go there too. And when he approached his father to do so, he was rejected and reprimanded by Suruchi, who was very prideful about being the favorite wife of the king. So Suruchi described how Dhruva Maharaj was inferior. Because he was not from her own womb, and how he should go to the Supreme Personality of Godhead to take birth again from her womb, so that if you want to enjoy his father's lap. Now imagine Dhruva Maharaj, a 5-year-old boy, hearing this. It must have hurt very much. And so he was distressed, and he went to his mother, Suniti. He was crying. And his mother was also distressed, seeing her boy crying and wondering what was going on, what happened. And others who happened to see what had happened earlier informed his mother what had happened, caught her up on what was going on. And Suniti was also equally distressed. But unfortunately, she knew that what Suruchi had said was actually true to a certain degree. And she realized that the only one who actually really could help him was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so first she consoled the Maharaj, but then she told him that, yes, what Suruchi said is true. Unfortunately, I'm not as favored by the king. And the only one who could help you with this is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in this way, Suniti instructed the Maharaj to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead with bhakti, as opposed to any other path, because they may not be as effective for a young 5-year-old boy. And don't worry about going to the demigods. They're only limited in what they can do. But if you worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead with bhakti, he can help you attain the goal that you want here. And so in this way, his mother was his first sort of determination. So Dhruva Maharaj listened to what she said, thought about it, gave it some consideration, and decided, yeah, I'm gonna take this up. I'm gonna try this. He was determined, and he decided to go for it. And so Dhruva Maharaj left the kingdom, and he went out to the forest to go to the forest to meditate on the Supreme Lord, to take up his instructions that his mother has given. Now Narad Muni had been observing all this, and he was intrigued that what, a 5-year-old boy, he's got to go and go do this. bhakti at 5 years of age? Like, what? How is that possible? And so intrigued, he decided to approach him and question him about his motives and what is he doing. He even tried to discourage him that, oh, this is not the right path for a 5-year-old boy. You're just a young Kshatriya boy. You're misguided. This is not the path for you. He tried to explain to Dhruva Maharaj how difficult the path is. But ultimately, Dhruva Maharaj doubled down on his desire. He wanted to occupy a position that's more exalted than anything achieved by anyone in the three worlds, but even by his own father or his great-grandfather or his grandfather. And so seeing that Dhruva Maharaj was firm in his determination, that he was not going to give up, Narad Muni decided to explain it to him, and Dhruva Maharaj inquired from him. So Narad Muni instructed Dhruva Maharaj accordingly. He mentioned that what his mother had told him was actually quite apt, and that he should meditate on the Supreme Lord. He went on to describe the Supreme Lord's form, and then he left Dhruva Maharaj with these instructions. Now, before we continue with Dhruva Maharaj's story, Narad Muni actually went on to check on Dhruva Maharaj's father, King Uttanapad, to see what sort of state he might have been in. And when he saw Uttanapad, he saw that he was distressed, he was worried, he was regretful of his actions that he had done towards Dhruva Maharaj. And seeing his state, Narad Muni reassured him that don't worry, Dhruva Maharaj was doing well, and that he would actually go on to have a great reputation. So that gave some solace to his father, and he continued on at least meditating on his son Dhruva Maharaj. Now coming back to Dhruva Maharaj, he decided to take up Narad Muni's instructions, and he meditated on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He took up some deep austerities, increasing them with time, reducing the amount of food he took month after month. And he started affecting the world actually with his austerities. The world started trembling, and the universal breathing was just choking up. And eventually the demigods were being affected by this too, so they all went to the Supreme Lord Vishnu. And now Vishnu consoled the demigods by saying that, oh, don't worry, I'll appear in front of him and I will take care of the situation. And so while Dhruva Maharaj was continuing on with his meditation, he was focused on the Supreme Lord Vishnu within his heart. But then all of a sudden the Supreme Lord Vishnu disappeared, and it broke his meditation. And when he opened his eyes, the Supreme Lord had appeared right in front of Dhruva Maharaj. Dhruva Maharaj was stunned. How can the Lord? How is it possible that he's here in front of me? And so the Supreme Lord saw that he was a bit stunned, and so he touched his conch shell on his head and blessed him to speak. And Dhruva Maharaj offered his illustrious prayers. After hearing these prayers, the Supreme Lord was very pleased, and he granted Dhruva Maharaj his desires, everything he wanted, and then he left home. Dhruva Maharaj was there. He had got everything that he wanted, but he was dissatisfied. And being dissatisfied, he returned home. So this leaves us at an interesting point in the story, right? I'll switch to the exact Bhagavatam verse that we leave off at. Sopi sankalpajam Vishnu padasevopasaditam prapya sankalpa nirvanam nati prito jagatpuram. So this is in the 4th canto, 9th chapter, 27th verse. The translation says, despite having achieved the desired result of his determination by worshipping the lotus feet of the Lord, Dhruva Maharaj was not very pleased. Thus he returned to his home. So this is an important question, right? Why was Dhruva Maharaj left dissatisfied? If we look back at his journey, he left with a strong determination. He followed instructions of his spiritual master, Narad Muni. He went on and he executed those instructions quite well. And the Supreme Lord appeared in front of him too. And he actually even got the goal that he wanted of having that exalted position. But still, he was dissatisfied. And that's intriguing. And what's the reason for that? So Prabhupada answers this in the purport of this verse, actually. And he mentions that Dhruva Maharaj's desire was to get to the exalted position, excelling that of his father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather. And although it was a somewhat childish determination, because Dhruva Maharaj was nothing but a small child, and the Supreme Lord Vishnu was very kind, very merciful, very compassionate, he fulfilled Dhruva Maharaj's desire. But still, when Dhruva Maharaj returned home, he was not very pleased. And so although he was in the reason for that is because he was performing pure devotional service, in pure devotional service, there's no demand from the Lord. But still, since he was a child, he had this, and he was still young, he had demanded something earlier on. And so that's ultimately the reason for his dissatisfaction. In the Bhagavatam, the fifth canto, Krishna actually says that he fulfills the desires of his devotees in a way that they no longer want to have them again. And so this was an example of what was happening here. Even though Dhruva Maharaj was a young Kshatriya who was initially driven by anger and the desire for revenge, this attitude of "I'll show you," by following the instructions of his spiritual master, he engaged himself in devotional service and ultimately pleased the Supreme Lord. And even though his initial determination was rooted in anger, and that he wanted that material desire, that superior kingdom, the root of his determination ultimately changed as he was engaged in bhakti, engaged in devotional service. And so that begs another question, right? Is all determination the same? So far, we've seen one dictionary definition of determination, but that doesn't seem to be sufficient to explain Dhruva Maharaj's case, to explain what happened here. And so then the answer to that question, is all determination the same, is no, it's not all the same. Since that initial definition is insufficient, we can look for additional definitions. And the Bhagavad Gita actually provides some additional definitions here. It describes determination as three types under three different modes of material nature. So different ways of categorizing the mind, that state of mind that one might be in, what one might be going through. And so the determination in the three modes are described as follows. So the mode of goodness is described as that which is unbreakable, which is sustained with steadfastness by yoga practice, and which thus controls the activities of the mind, life, and senses. This is from the 18th chapter. Then the determination in the mode of passion is described as one who holds fast to fruited results in religion, economic development, and sense gratification. And determination in the mode of ignorance is that which cannot go beyond dreaming, fearfulness, lamentation, moroseness, and illusion. Now, if you look at these descriptions, right, the general, there's two subcategories that vary between the modes here. There's the quality of determination, how strong your determination is, how fixed you are on what you want to achieve. And then there's also the object of your determination. What is it that you're actually determined to do? What is it that you're striving to do? And so these two things, the quality of the determination and the object of your determination, they vary based on the mode that you're in at any given point in time. So we can take some examples just to further illustrate this concept, maybe a more practical example. And I'll take the example of waking up. These are things that I've experienced in my own life. Determination to wake up in the mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. So if you're in the mode of goodness, right, the idea is that you're focused on elevating your consciousness, elevating your mindset, and your determination is generally stronger, more rooted, more firm. One way you can describe this in a different set of words is contemplation and then action. And so taking that example of waking up, it could be like waking up after getting a good, sufficient amount of rest, and then starting your day with some japa after completing your initial morning duties. If you take the same example in the mode of passion, it might be something more along the lines of action and then contemplation. And so using that example, it could be waking up after maybe oversleeping and then jumping right into gaming. I was into gaming when I was younger, so I remember those mornings where I would wake up and just go right to the computer and start gaming. And so this determination in the mode of passion is focused more on enjoying, on attaining desires. It's focused on results, what I want to do, my passion, only what I want to, the desires basically. And as a result, the determination flickers a bit more. It's not necessarily as strong, since it's rooted only in results and desires. And then in the last case, we have determination in the mode of ignorance. In this case, we hold on to maybe self-defeating thought patterns, like daydreaming, being fearful, lamenting. And this is not the same thing as depression. It's more rooted in laziness. It's the idea that even though we know that the experience is, it's not going to be good, positive influence for us. It's going to result in misery. It's going to be futile in the attempt. We still do it. And that's where we're rooted more in the mode of ignorance. And then you can describe this as there's no action, there's no contemplation either. practical idleness, essentially. And so what I experience is that when I wake up after oversleeping, but I'm stuck in bed, I just don't want to get up, and I'm just dwelling on thoughts and just the sense of idleness, inaction. So in this way, we have determination in three different modes. And this relates back to Dhruva Maharaj because his initial determination was more rooted in the mode of passion. It was something wanting to achieve something, wanting to have this strong kingdom so he can show everyone how great he is and get revenge of sorts based on the way he was treated. But eventually that shifted into something greater, to goodness, because it was motivated by devotional service. And so the key point to make here is that the extent to which we'll be determined for a particular action will vary according to the mode that's dominating our consciousness at that time. When that action becomes favorable for Krishna, it becomes bhakti. Right? So I can break that down. It's a bit dense. The extent to which we'll be determined for a particular action, right? The amounts, how much motivation we'll have to achieve the object of our determination, to actually go do something, it'll vary based on what mode of nature is dominating our consciousness at the time. The Bhagavad Gita describes in the 14th chapter how each of the three modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance, are always dominating and fighting to take precedence in our mind. And so based on whatever mode that's dominating our mind at the time, that's how much determination we'll have towards a particular action. And so then when that action becomes for Krishna, for his intent, for favorable for Krishna, it becomes bhakti. So we can take some examples, just another example just to clarify this point more. Let's say someone is donating to a charity, and it's done out of duty, they have excess money, and there's a desire to help serve and to help other people. So that becomes something more than the mode of goodness. It's done at the right time, the right place, in the right environment, the right people. But if you take that same action, donating to a charity, but it's done with the motive of getting some publicity or some fame, people will see me, I'll get the social media, I'll get the clicks, I'll get the likes, then it becomes done in the mode of passion because there's an ulterior motive and it's not really pure anymore. And of course, the lowest is in the mode of ignorance. When we donate to a charity, when it's not run with the right mood, the right attitude, the right place, the right circumstance. Maybe we donate to a charity without really caring or looking into what the charity does and just being very unaware and having a lack of attention at the time. That becomes done in the mode of ignorance. And so if you place the charity with the temple, it becomes more related to bhakti because now we're describing activities that are favorable for Krishna, for his benefit. And so, okay, so thus far we described, okay, there's determination. We gave an initial definition, a dictionary definition. And then we described, okay, there's actually more to it. There's different types of determination based on the different modes of material nature. And based on what sort of mode is dominating our consciousness, that'll affect the amount of determination we might have. So the next question that might naturally arise is, how do we actually elevate our determination? And so the answer there is conviction. Having a deeper conviction is ultimately what will help us improve and strengthen our determination. And so this idea of conviction, we see it actually in the English language itself, right? If you take the example of the judicial system, a court, the American court system, there's two phrases that are commonly used. There is innocent until proven guilty, and then there's another phrase. I'll come back to that one. But when someone's going on trial, right? There's a crime that they've supposedly done. There's a trial, right? And they're considered innocent until proven guilty. And then they have to be proven until beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the second phrase. And only once they're proven to have, once the jury is convinced that they've done their crime beyond a reasonable doubt, only then they're actually convicted. And so this kind of helps illustrate the idea of conviction here, that it's something stronger. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a very stronger form of a conviction. And this is the idea that the initial verse is getting at. I mentioned that there's that impossible determination from the purport. There's a deep determination, a strong determination, a firm determination. The translation also mentioned determination and faith. So this stronger form determination that was being referenced earlier, that's actually conviction. And so like we did with determination, maybe we can start with just a simple definition from the dictionary. Again, Merriam-Webster. It's just a strong persuasion or a belief, and it's the state of being convinced ultimately. And in the same way that we had examples from our scriptures of a devotee who was strong and rooted in conviction, we can find another example of another 5-year-old boy who was also a great example of conviction, Sri Prahlad Maharaj. So if I, there we go to the next slide there. The story of Prahlad Maharaj actually starts with Hiranyakashipu and the death of his brother Hiranyaksha. He had fought against Varahadev had killed him, and now Hiranyakashipu was left without a brother. And he was begrieved by his death against Lord Varahadev, and he ultimately, Hiranyakashipu, he blamed the Supreme Personality of Godhead for the death of his brother. And out of grievance for his brother, Hiranyakashipu induced different demons to cause chaos on the earth. So the demigods came down to see what was going on, what was happening. At the same time, Hiranyakashipu knew that he had to manage the different relatives, the sons, the brothers, everyone who also was facing the loss of Hiranyaksha. And so he instructed his relatives to pacify them, telling them that, oh, we're not the body, we're the soul, and that the soul never actually is killed. And with time, Hiranyakashipu eventually started doing austerities. And so once the demigods saw that he was doing austerities, they returned back to their abodes. But in reality, Hiranyakashipu actually wanted to become immortal, to get revenge, to seek out revenge for his brother, Hiranyaksha. And so his penances became so strong eventually that fire started coming out of his head, and it started to disturb other planets, so much so that Brahma personally came down, seeing the great austerities that he was doing, and granted him a boon. Like I mentioned, Hiranyakashipu's goal was ultimately to get immortality, but he couldn't do so. Brahma couldn't directly grant that to him. So he asked for virtual immortality, giving different conditions where he couldn't be killed, where he couldn't be affected, neither inside nor outside, not by any weapon, not by man, etc., etc. And so Brahma granted these benedictions, and Hiranyakashipu went on to rule the 3 worlds, and all the demigods and demons and the humans began to serve him. And he was very puffed up with all this newfound material power he had, and he always transgressed all the Vedic teachings. Everyone prayed to Vishnu for relief. They were all suffering, they were all distressed. And Vishnu, seeing all the prayers and seeing the situation, pacified the aggrieved beings of the world, and said that he would actually personally come down soon and kill Hiranyakashipu for tormenting his own son, who was going to be a Mahabhagavat. And so that Mahabhagavat, that son of Hiranyakashipu, is Prahlad Maharaj. He was born a pure devotee, and even though he went to school, even though he was sent to school to learn about politics, about economics, about different material endeavors, he ultimately refused to take it up and continued on with his practice. And once Hiranyakashipu had asked him, what's the best thing that he had learned at his school? And in response, he actually preached to Hiranyakashipu how he should worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who was his enemy for killing his brother. Hiranyakashipu was stunned and confused. He thought maybe his son was polluted by some other boy at the school. And so he asked his teachers to take extra care and be particularly aware of what Prahlad Maharaj was doing. And so when Prahlad and his teachers returned, the teachers asked him why he went against their teachings. Where did he get this understanding? And so Prahlad Maharaj still stuck to his belief and was firm on the understanding of Vishnu as the greatest and the only shelter for everyone. The teachers scolded him, but they tried their best to educate him, and they eventually presented Prahlad Maharaj to his father once again. So Prahlad Maharaj took his son up on his lap very affectionately and tried asking him again, what did you learn at school today? What have you learned? But Prahlad Maharaj once again preached the glories of the Supreme Lord, Vishnu. Ad block ki jai. We can go back to the slides. There we go. Yes, okay. Yeah, so Prahlad Maharaj once again told his parents the glories of the Supreme Lord Vishnu. And Hiranyakashipu was once again stunned. Where is he learning this? What's going on? And so he asked Prahlad directly, where did you learn this? Well, Prahlad Maharaj replied that it's actually every being's duty to learn Vishnu Bhakti and to take up this practice. And so now Hiranyakashipu was enraged, and he tried to get all of his assistants to kill him, but they repeatedly failed at their different attempts. They tried throwing him off a cliff, sending him with elephants, having him attacked by snakes, but all those attempts failed. And Hiranyakashipu ultimately arrested his son and began teaching him under some of the sons of his own guru, Shukracharya. Now meanwhile, while Prahlad Maharaj was in school, he was instructing his classmates whenever the teachers were not present. He's teaching them the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and how he's the worshipful deity for everyone. And I want you to utilize every single moment they get to ultimately serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead and to work and cultivate and will focus on spiritual advancement. Now, Prahlad Maharaj's his classmates inquired and heard from him, but they wondered, where did you learn all this thing? Where did you learn all this knowledge from? And so Prahlad Maharaj revealed to them that he had learned everything from the womb of his mother, from Narad Muni, actually. The demigods had initially actually wanted to kill Prahlad Maharaj when he was in the womb of his mother, thinking that he was a demon. But Narad Muni had stopped them and actually ended up instructing his mother and indirectly instructing Prahlad on spiritual knowledge. And so while he was in the womb, Prahlad Maharaj, all that knowledge he received stuck to him. And so as the teachers saw that Prahlad Maharaj was slowly converting his own classmates, they approached Hiranyakashipu again. And this time Hiranyakashipu was furious. He decided that he would personally kill Prahlad Maharaj. And he was so extremely angry, and Prahlad Maharaj begged for mercy and tried pacifying him. But Hiranyakashipu denied everything he was saying, claiming that he himself was greater than the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But Prahlad Maharaj continued challenging that. He did not back down. And so Hiranyakashipu ultimately asked him, if your God is everywhere, is he in this pillar? And Prahlad Maharaj confirmed that yes, the Supreme Lord is everywhere. He is in that pillar. And when Hiranyakashipu ultimately smashed the pillar, Narasimhadev came out of the pillar, and they fought, and ultimately Hiranyakashipu died at the hands of Sri Narasimhadev. And so if we look back at the story of Prahlad Maharaj, right, why is he an example of conviction? He was always focused and firm in his stance on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It was something deeper. It was something internal inside of him. Now, if we connect this back to determination, which we were talking about earlier, right? What is the relationship between determination and conviction? One way we can describe each of these words, right? Conviction is what we perceive and what we believe. It's rooted in belief that shapes our decisions, our identity. Whereas determination is what we want to do and how strongly we want to do it. It's like persistent effort we have despite different challenges we face in accomplishing a certain goal. And so the key idea here, right, is that if our conviction is weak, then our determination can't be fully strong. Another example, just to explain this concept, a more practical example maybe, is let's say we have someone named Alex, and he deeply believes that running is essential for his long-term health. It's very good for his mental well-being. And so he's convinced that this lifestyle is non-negotiable for his own personal growth. He has this deep-rooted belief that running is good for him ultimately. And then he decides to also sign up for a marathon. Now, besides this, Alex he's not a morning person. He doesn't like to get up. He struggles to wake up in the morning. But still, he sets his alarm every morning at 5 a.m. every day, and he has his training schedule allocated for the morning. And even if he's tired, even if he's busy, even if he doesn't feel motivated, he pushes through because he has this goal of wanting to complete the marathon. But since he has such a fundamental belief that running is good for him, even after the marathon is over, he still continues running regularly. It's no longer to hit some goal or to hit some endpoint, but more just because that's what he is and what he believes in. And so in the case of the marathon here, right, that's when he had determination. That's when he was going through those challenges of getting up in the morning to accomplish that goal. But then the running he keeps doing after the marathon, that's because his conviction, his deep-rooted belief in that running is actually good for him. It's beneficial for him. And so in this way, there are a lot of different types of convictions one might have, even amongst devotees. In the Bhagavad Gita, the 7th chapter, 16th verse, it describes various reasons one might approach God. Maybe one might go to a temple. There's the inquisitive, those who want to know something, have something they want to learn about. Then there's those who desire wealth, desire money, desire some nice riches in their life. And then there's those who are distressed. They might be going through a difficult situation. They might be having a difficult time in their life. And then there's those who are searching for knowledge of the absolute truth. They're seeking for what is the purpose of life, answering the more fundamental existential questions. And so these are devotees who might have a certain level of conviction that might encourage them to go to a temple, maybe approach God through some means. But then there might be other people, different devotees who have a different level of conviction. Devotees who might, they don't just go to temple once, but they might come back more often because they find a sense of community. Maybe they enjoy the free prasadam, the free food. Or maybe they like some of the activities like kirtan or going out on book distribution or just some temple activities they enjoy. So this is another level of conviction that devotees might have. But we can go even deeper, actually. And some devotees might find some deeper rooted purpose of coming back to temple, engaging more consistently, more seriously. Maybe they find it duty driven to do bhakti, or to do, maybe they find it their own duty to serve. Maybe they have a deep desire to continuously serve their guru, or maybe they have a deepened faith in Shastra and the scriptures. And no matter what the different convictions one devotee might have, we ultimately have the example of the gopis, who are the highest example, having the most conviction, practicing uttama bhakti, the bhakti that is unmotivated, uninterrupted, and untinged by any other personal desires. And so we have all these different types of conviction. Clearly, conviction is its own spectrum. Everyone can have their own conviction. And so the important thing to remember is that you should ultimately be honest about your conviction. Be true to yourself where you are. The Bhagavatam says, Swesve adhikari yanishta sa guna parikirtita karmanam jatya shodhanam anena niyamakrita guna dosha vidhanena sanganam tyajanechaya. This is from the 11th canto. The translation says, it is firmly declared that the steady adherence of transcendentalists to their respective spiritual positions constitutes real piety, and that sin occurs when a transcendentalist neglects his prescribed duty. One who adopts this standard of piety and sin, sincerely desiring to give up all past association with sense gratification, is able to subdue materialistic activities which are by nature impure. And so the idea here is you should be real and be honest about your convictions. Be true to yourself. Faking it is only a sin. It's best to practice be honest in your position and to keep going with where you're at. No need to pretend to be something that you're not. And the simple way of explaining that, right, is like, don't be a liar, have a sincere desire. In addition to that, don't worry so much about other people's convictions. There's no need to rock the boat. There's no need to be comparing yourself to other people about where they are and where you're at. People are going through lifetimes of different karmic reactions and different things that are all stored up somehow in their subtle body. And so there's no point in comparing or in worrying about and questioning other people's convictions. Ultimately, focus more on cultivating the sincerity in wanting to reduce sense gratification and cultivate that hankering for Krishna, hankering for his service, and ultimately he'll take care of the rest. And so we have this idea, of determination versus conviction. That conviction is much more strong and rooted, more of the more important underlying reasoning that might drive our determination. And we have this idea of, being important, being honest with your conviction, be real with where you're at. But then it's also important to ask what gets in the way of our conviction. And that's ultimately material desire. And so with this, we can transition to the second part of our translation, right? Thus far, we've focused on determination, on conviction, which covers the first part, which says one should engage oneself in the practice of yoga with determination and faith and not be deviated from the path. And so we can transition to the second part, right, which says one should abandon without exception all material desires born of mental speculation and thus control all the senses on all sides by the mind. Just to take a quick, some of the key words from this verse, the second half of the translation, there's material desires being discussed. We should abandon them. And then it seems to say, and thus control. So by abandoning these material desires, we can control the senses by all the sides of the mind. Because there's a couple ideas here. And like we did previously, we can start with a simple definition of what is a material desire. Right, so from the book Perfect Questions and Perfect Answers, Srila Prabhupada gives a really nice differentiation between a material desire, material life, a spiritual desire, spiritual life. He says, when you desire to gratify your senses, that is material life. And when you desire to serve God, that is spiritual life. That is the difference between material and spiritual life. So the key distinction here, right, is the desire to gratify your senses. That becomes a material desire. And when you desire to serve God, to serve Krishna, that becomes more of a spiritual desire. And then that's the distinction, right? It's whether you're gratifying your senses or whether you're serving God, basically. But there's a common underlying theme between the two, which is desire. It's rooted in your desire ultimately, right? So, if we have this distinction between material desire and spiritual desire, what ultimately influences our desire? Which becomes like the next question we might ask: what influences my desires? So we have from the fourth canto, we have a verse that says, Atmanam indriyartham cha param yad ubayorapi satyashaya upadho vai puman pashyati nanyada. So this is from the 4th canto, the 22nd chapter, and the 28th verse. The translation says, when the soul exists for sense gratification, he creates different desires, and for that reason he becomes subjected to different designations. When one is in the transcendental position, he is no longer interested in anything except fulfilling the desires of the Lord. So the short answer here is like, what influences my desire? It depends on what I believe my identity to be. So in this verse, there's a couple key important phrases here, right? There's the word indriyartham, which means for sense gratification. And there's also ashaya, ashaya in the third line there, which says material desires. And then there's upadho, which means designation. And so when the soul is there for sense gratification, right, material desires and material designations rise, right? That's the first key idea being mentioned there. But then if we look at a couple other words like param, which means transcendental, and we look at the word pashyati, which means sees or to see. And then lastly, at the end there, we have nanyada, which with Sunday rules that can be broken down into na anyada. That means not otherwise. And so we see with that not, there's a negation. And so then what this is saying now is that only when one is in a transcendental position, they can see nothing but fulfilling the desires of the Lord, of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. So the idea is that while I tend to identify on the material bodily platform, I am subjected to material designations, and as such, material desires. The key word there is material, right? While we believe that we are the body, we're going to be subjected to the material bodily designations and get desires that are ultimately focused on the body. So examples of this, right? It's our relationships that we have. Like I'm a mother, I'm an employee, I'm a male, I'm a president. These are all designations and relationships that are in relation to this body. But then when I identify with my true spiritual platform as the soul, I'm subjected to my true designation as an eternal servant of Krishna. And as such, I produce spiritual desires. So when I shift my identity to understanding that, okay, I'm the soul, the more and more I shift to that, it's not like an on and off switch, right? There's levels of realization one might can have. And as one increases their realization, the more spiritual one's desires become. So to summarize, to capture those ideas in brief, the influence of desire relates to how much we believe we're the body versus we're the soul. The more we believe that we're the body, the more we'll be focused on having material desires, because we believe in things that we believe we're something material ultimately. But when we start to realize that we're actually something spiritual, we're the soul, that's when our desires shift to something more spiritual, which is serving the Supreme Lord, since we're a part and parcel of Him. And when we ultimately please Him, when we serve Him, He brings us happiness too. Right, so we have this concept of desires, okay? The desires are influenced by how much we believe we're the soul. But then if we go back to the translation briefly, there's also this mention of, okay, there's material desires, but then there's also senses, there's also the mind. So the next question might become, what is the relationship between the soul, the mind, the senses? What's the connection? So the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita gives us this connection. It describes the working senses are superior to the dull matter. The mind is still higher than the senses. The intelligence is still higher than the mind. And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. So just from reading that, you can already see there's some sort of hierarchy, there's some sort of ordering happening. This is higher than this is higher than this. But it's still not quite clear what the relationship between these different entities are. And that's where we can turn to an example that's given in the Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada cites this example in one of his purports, but it actually originally comes from the Katha Upanishad. So we have this picture on the screen. There is a chariot, there is a passenger in the chariot, and there's someone that's driving the chariot, controlling the reins, and then there's horses. And so just visually, right, we can see each of the horses have a sense on them. So there's like the eye, there's a nose, there's an ear, and so on. And so each of these 5 horses represent the 5 different senses. And then the reins they have represent the mind ultimately, as they seem to be latching onto the senses. The person driving the horse driving the chariot seems to be the intelligence. The person sitting in the chariot, that's us, that's the soul. And then the chariot itself represents the body. So the idea being made in the couple of previous slides and the previous verses was that the more we believe that we're the body, the more we'll have material desire. We'll be focused on being the body, focused on things in relation to our senses. But when we realize and identify that, oh, we're actually the soul, that's when we can actually direct the intelligence and direct all these different entities, the mind, the senses, the soul, in the right direction. So when we recognize that we're actually the passenger and we're not the chariot, that's when we can actually direct the intelligence and give the intelligence the right guidance to actually direct the rest of the part, which is the senses and the mind. And this is kind of showcased in the analogy from the Bhagavad Gita verse, right? There's the hierarchy is starting to be a bit more obvious, where we see, okay, the mind has the reins which connects to the horses. The mind is higher than the senses. The intelligence which controls the reins controls the mind. That's higher than the mind. But then soul is the passenger who actually tells the intelligence or tells the driver, where do you want to go, or where should I direct to? That's why the soul is ultimately higher than the intelligence. And it's very easy to actually to misidentify yourself with the body. If you think of like a modern day example, let's say as you're driving in a car and someone else is driving in their car and the car hits your car, most people would intuitively say that, oh, you hit me. They wouldn't say that you hit my car. And so that's the same idea here. We're this passenger, or we're thinking, oh, we're this whole chariot, this whole system, that's all me. But the me is ultimately the soul, the passenger, not the whole system. And so when we have a deeper understanding, okay, now we know that, okay, there's a soul, there's the mind, there's intelligence, there's the senses. What is and we have this analogy of a chariot here. What should we actually direct the chariot to do? Where should we direct the chariot to go? What's the direction we should give ultimately? And so that brings us to the next question, right? Where should we tell the chariot to go? And so there's a classic verse that Vaisheshika Prabhu always quotes, Akama sarva kamo va moksha kamo dharadhi divrena bhakti yogena yajeta purusham param. This is from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 3, verse 10. The translation goes, a person who has broader intelligence, whether he be full of all material desire, without any material desire, or desiring liberation, must by all means worship the supreme whole, the personality of Godhead. So there's a couple important words here within the verse itself, right? There's akama, which means to transcend all material desires, or one who has no material desires. Then there's sarvakama, which means like one who has the sum total of all material desires, who has so many desires, who the translation says full of all material desires. And then there's the third case, right? There's mokshakama, one who might desire liberation, one who's just done with the world. They don't really want to have any desires. They want to restrict their desires. That's one way of looking at it. They desire liberation. And so it's saying, the verse is saying, whichever one you are, akama, sarvakama, va, mokshakama, whichever one you fit into, right? A person who is udaradihi, a person who has a broader intelligence, will ultimately perform bhakti yogena. They'll do devotional service to attain the desire, whatever the desire might be. And not only will they do bhakti yoga, they'll do tivrena bhakti yoga, unto yajeta purusham param, unto the supreme personality of Godhead. And the tivrena bhakti is an important underrated word in this verse. It translates to with great force. And so the bhakti that they render unto the Supreme Lord, it's with great force and dedication. It's sincere, right? It relates back to what we were talking about in our verse today, right? Having that deep conviction, having that firm determination. And that's the key, same idea here with tivrena bhakti. Have that deep determination and go to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So where do we tell the chariot to go? Where do we direct our intelligence? Regardless of your desire, ultimately go to Krishna. It doesn't matter if you want material desires. It doesn't matter if you want to if you want to gratify your senses, if you want to attain Krishna, learn to love and cultivate a relationship with him. In any case, go to Krishna. That's the best thing we can do. So far we've looked at what desires are. how they relate to the mind, how they relate to the soul, how everything's kind of intertwined and connected. And then we also establish that, okay, regardless of what we desire, we should ultimately go to Krishna for the desire because he's the supreme personality of Godhead. He can actually give us any desire, whereas other beings like the demigods, they can't necessarily give us anything that we want. So now that we've established these ideas, right? So even though we might go to Krishna for whatever desire we might have, how do we actually elevate the quality of our desires? How do you purify your desires ultimately? So there's a beautiful verse in the Bhagavad Gita, Vishaya vinivartante nihara niraha niraha rasya dehina rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. This is Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, verse 59. A beautiful verse. The translation goes, though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagements, by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. So, in short, right, how do I purify my desires? You cultivate a higher taste, which will ultimately end the taste for lower desires. And so in the previous slide, right, we talked about, okay, we can go to Krishna for all these, whatever desire you might have. If it's good, if it's bad, that's good. Go to Krishna for them. But we still want to ultimately cultivate higher desires. We want to go from material desires to spiritual desires. But sometimes, even though we might do so, these lower desires, they might still linger. It's difficult. Sometimes maybe someone's trying to quit smoking, or maybe someone has this, innate desire for fame, wanting to get recognition, different things like that they can be subtle, they can be more external. And sometimes, no matter how hard we try, no matter how much determination we put into it, at the end of the day, it's just not necessarily going away. And so the idea that's being presented in this verse here is that sometimes the most effective tactic is not necessarily to focus on getting rid of ourselves of these lower material desires, just to restrict our desires and to not do these things. But we're also here to invest in our Krishna conscious practice, to create more positive Krishna conscious experiences by trying to experience these higher tastes. And so when we try to do this, when we focus on doing devotional service, when we focus on investing in these higher tastes, going to kirtan, coming to temple, associating with devotees, performing Panchanga Bhakti, when we do that, plus let a little time pass and a little patience, allow for a little patience also, practice a little patience, these will ultimately drive us towards a higher form of desires. When we struggle to find that higher taste, we can associate with and take shelter of those who might have it, who might have at least that higher taste, or might have at least more of that higher taste than we might have. If we look at the examples we just saw of Dhruva Maharaj and Sri Prahlad Maharaj, that's exactly what they did too. If you take the example of Dhruva Maharaj, he had a clear goal in mind, that he had this material desire that he wanted to accomplish, and in trying to achieve that goal, he took the instruction from Sri Narad Muni, who had the higher taste, and found his own higher taste, basically, by taking the shelter of Sri Narad Muni. By following his instructions, he ultimately found that, okay, this desire is no longer what I want. He focused on something more, which is just serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu. We see the same thing from Prahlad Maharaj. He was actually more fortunate. He had the association of Narad Muni, who had that higher taste right from the very beginning, right from the start. And so thus since he had that association right from the start, he never actually fell for any inferior goals, no matter how much he was surrounded by demons, no matter how much his teachers pushed him for learning all this, the different material endeavors. He already had that higher taste because he associated with Sri Narad Muni. And so the same, we can apply this principle to our own lives, right? Even if we may not have the higher taste, even if we might be struggling with the lower taste, we can still try to associate with those who might have the higher taste. And with time and with some patience, we can also cultivate that higher taste. So when you can't find the higher taste and don't know how to engage in it, lean on your guru, lean on your mentors, lean on your shiksha gurus, diksha gurus, whoever it might be, to help you get there and help you cultivate that higher consciousness. So we can come back and put the whole translation together, right? So it says one should engage oneself in the practice of yoga with determination and faith and not be deviated from the path. One should abandon without exception all material desires born of mental speculation and thus control all the senses on all the sides by the mind. putting the pieces together, right? There's two aspects being talked about here, right? There's the one cultivating that conviction, cultivating the determination, and not being deviated from the path, being locked in and laser focused. But at the same time, don't worry about those material desires. Don't focus about the things that bring you down. Focus on the goal. Focus on the path. Stay strong and stay steady and keep going. And that's kind of the idea being propagated here by this verse. And lastly, we can take maybe one final example of Srila Prabhupada. Uh, Throughout the slides, I mentioned Prahlad Maharaj, I mentioned Dhruva Maharaj, and I mentioned these verses. They have different things being said, but they're not necessarily always relatable. When we think of Prahlad Maharaj, we think of Dhruva Maharaj. They were not necessarily living the same world that we are today. They're not necessarily they're 5-year-old boys, and I'm not a 5-year-old boy anymore. But the examples don't necessarily resonate with us. It seems like a different time. It seems like a distant time in the past. And same thing with the philosophy. The Sometimes I feel like, okay, it's easier to say but hard to implement, hard to practice. But that's why we have someone like Srila Prabhupada. Um, Even though he was a pure devotee, of course, the trials he faced, the struggles that he had throughout his whole life, they're still much more relatable to our lives, especially in comparison to Dhruva Maharaj and Prahlad Maharaj. A large part of this is actually because he was here very recently. He was here in the same Kali Yuga that we're in, and he faced Kali Yuga just as we do. And he was also temporarily engaged in some activities that are maybe similar to the ones that we might engage in. If we look at his example of his life, right, he had a family just like we did. He had a business he was engaged in. Many of us work, especially in the Bay Area. A lot of people are everywhere. Many devotees work, and he was also invested at one point in time in his country's politics and the independence movement. And in that same way, we have to face the challenges of living in different countries by certain governments, being faced with certain different situations based on where we stay. But Prabhupada had a firm desire, continuous, that was focused in identifying the absolute truth and being sincere to that desire. And with that sincerity, he ultimately slowly dropped the other material engagements that he had, his business, his family. He slowly let things go. His focus was laser pointed on that one goal of identifying the absolute truth. And in that way, he was an example for us, teaching us that when we endeavor sincerely, when we try to focus with determination, Krishna will also help us out. This was showcased in his own life, right? Because he ultimately found a guru who guided him and gave him a seemingly impossible instruction. But still, even though the instruction seemed impossible, he still showed us that the perfection is actually in executing the bona fide guru's instruction with conviction, trusting the guru, focusing on the instruction, and trying to execute it to the best of our ability. That's ultimately the perfection. And it's because he had this example, because he ultimately took the time and effort to do all these things. That's the real reason that we're here talking right now. It's all because of Srila Prabhupada. And so in this way, he demonstrated this verse very effectively. He showed us what determination, what conviction means, what it means to stay focused on the path, what it means to slowly let go of these material desires, and thus control the senses and the mind. And the reality is that we can follow in Srila Prabhupada's footsteps too, if we dig for determination and ditch deviant desires. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. I'd like to again thank you all the acharyas and my spiritual master and all the various devotees for everything all the knowledge that have made accessible to me. If there's anything that you liked, you found of value, you can thank them. And if there's anything that was incorrect, that might have been faulty, or if you didn't like so much, you can blame me for them, and I apologize for the mistakes. But please correct me on the mistakes too, if you can, so that I can still learn and I can grow as well. That's everything I have today. So thank you for your time. Are there any questions or concerns or corrections? I can stop sharing, maybe.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees, please ask any questions or if you have any comments with that to Yogadish Prabhu. Yes, Hala Yoda Kripa Prabhu, please go ahead, unmute yourself and go.
Hare Krishna Yogadisha Prabhu. Please accept my obeisances, Jai Shri Prabhupada. That was a really nice class. Thank you for presenting it nicely. I'll share a reflection first and then a question. My reflection is I really appreciated how clear cut your presentation was. you had two topics, and in each topic you went through each of the points and had a chain of connecting questions and answers backed by Shastra. So I thought that was very expert. I wanted to congratulate you for that. And my question was, yeah, you talked about a higher taste at the end and going past our lower taste. You said the ways we can get a higher taste is by associating with those who have higher taste and doing things that are of a higher taste. But what about those people, devotees, I mean, who are doing devotional service, but side by side they're not yet giving up their bad habits, or you could say their material sense gratification? What is their situation, and what should they do? What should they do?
Yeah, so it's a tricky practice, right? You describe there's devotees who might be doing their practice, they might be doing devotional service, but at the same time, they don't necessarily see that they're making progress. They're not necessarily quite progressing in the way they might want to or at the rate they might want to. And so if I come back to that, I have to share screen again. One moment. There we go. If we come back to the verse, one thing that I recently, so here there's a, Prabhupada mentioned the Upadeshamrita verse in the purport. Utsahan nishayat dhairyat tat karma pravartanat sangatyagat sato vritte shadbhir bhakti prasiddhati. So it says one can execute the process of bhakti yoga successfully with full-hearted enthusiasm, perseverance, determination, by following the prescribed duties in the association of devotees, and by engaging completely in the activities of goodness. And so the key, I brought this verse to focus on a specific word, which was dhairyat. I think in this description here, it talks about perseverance. Other translations I've heard are perseverance, patience as well. And so sometimes we may not progress in the way we want to, but the important thing is that progressing on this path is no joke. Actually, it's not a simple thing. Sometimes we have these lower qualities that we're not able to get rid of. We can't shake them necessarily right away. They're not going away as fast as we want them to. But the process that we might be facing, one could describe it as anartha nivritti, as the process of getting rid of these lower modes, these lower attachments, these lower tastes. It's not something that happens simply or just casually in one lifetime. It's a very serious process. And one thing we have to remember is that we're going through this material world as a jiva who's had countless, many lifetimes in the past. All those lifetimes we were doing incurring different karmic reactions, doing different, maybe good pious activities, maybe negative activities as well. And so all those things we have to face the results of ultimately. And at the end of the day, the best we can do is to keep going with patience, because at the end of the day, when we have these when we're dealing with all these different past lives, past activities, we don't really fully know exactly what we have done and what we might be facing. And so while bhakti yoga is good, while it might be helping us, make progress, we do have to be patient and let those lower modes slowly go away with time and with practice. Another verse that comes to mind from the Bhagavad Gita is, I think, Manushyanam Sahasreshu. Sahasreshu. Hopefully this gets me to database. Okay, cool. Yeah, Manushyanam Sahasreshu Kaschid Yatati Siddhaye Yatatam Api Siddhanam Kaschin Mam Veti Tatvata. So the translation is saying, out of many thousands among men, one may endeavor for perfection, and of those who have decided who have achieved perfection, hardly one knows me in truth. And so I bring up this verse because it's talking about how rare it is for one to get to that highest level, right? Like think about the numbers that are mentioned in this verse, right? Out of thousands among men, one may endeavor for perfection. And so out of those many, and of those one of many thousands, hardly one of them may know me in truth. So the process of getting to that highest goal, it comes back to that initial point I was saying about anartha nivritti is no joke. It's a thing that takes time, it takes process, it's not something that can be accomplished very easily. I hope that helped with a bit here and there. To sum up, I mentioned a couple of different things there. The key idea I wanted to bring out was that it requires patience. And sometimes maybe when you're struggling to have enthusiasm to keep going, it's also nice to go on do things like book distribution. When we see new people, when you see their initial enthusiasm, it helps to bring out our own enthusiasm again. And so just focus on the instructions with the Shamrita, having determination, having enthusiasm, having patience. And we can go pretty far with that if we're sincere. Hope that helps a little bit.
Yes, thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees. If you have any more questions, please ask Yogadis Prabhu. Don't feel shy, you can always unmute, you can comment, you can praise his presentation. It was excellent, as Alayuda Prabhu said. There was a chain of many thoughts, and he connected it well, supported by Shastras. So please don't feel shy. Okay, looks like Anand Baladev Prabhu might want to say something.
Yes, thank you, Prabhu. Thank you, Yogadish, for a beautiful class. I really like the presentation. The question which I have is on the couple of verses which you shared on Srimad Bhagavatam 4:22-28, and the other one was the Katha Upanishad verse. So in that you mentioned that there is a body and then there is a soul, right? So when we have desire based on body and then there is a and we think of, yeah, can you share that verse?
So this one or the one before?
The one before, yeah.
Okay.
So you were mentioning that the desires which we have, how can one be always on the always have a desire which is spiritual, so did you understand my question?
Yeah, so if I understood correctly, you're saying that, okay, we have this idea that, okay, we're the body. On one hand, we might fully believe that we're the body and that we fully are thinking of desires on the bodily platform. On the other hand, we have this complete understanding that we're the soul and that all our desires are fully on the spiritual platform. And so your question is, how do we always have that level of desires? Is that what you're asking?
Right.
Yeah, so I'll say two things. First, I'll come back to one of the future slides, the later slides I mentioned was uh, no, sorry, back here. Yeah, this one's Shveshwadikari. So you can think of it as a spectrum, right? There's a let's assume one hand of the spectrum is like completely understand, feeling that okay, I'm this body, I am my senses, and sense gratification is ultimately the greatest goal in life. That's one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum is the complete opposite, where you're fully aware that you're the soul, and that you're not the body, and that Krishna is ultimately the goal of life. Just pleasing him is the best thing I can do, and I'm an eternal servant of Krishna. And then everything. Then there's also various things in the middle, and the reality, just from practical personal experience, we're not often just on one spot in that spectrum. We're often hovering and bouncing at different times in different places based on the activities we do, based on the modes of material nature that we might be subjected to at the time. And so I come to this verse first because this Swesvadikari, because you asked, okay, how do we always do this? And one of the key ideas is that you can't necessarily fake that. You can't fake being completely spiritual, completely fully understanding that you're the soul, right? You have to be honest with where you are, and act in that way. That's the best thing you can do. In the translation, it mentions that it is firmly declared. Oh, here. It is firmly declared that the steady adherence of transcendentalists to their respective spiritual positions constitutes real piety. Respective spiritual position. So wherever you are on that spectrum, and sticking to that position, that's where the piety comes in. So that's the first point I want to make. Now, coming back to your question, right? Okay, fine, we're at this certain point. How do you actually go to this higher point? How do you get to this point of where you're completely spiritually aware that you're the soul, you're not the body? There's probably the verse that comes to mind. I think it's 18:14. Yeah, this one. So adishtanam tatha karta karanam cha pratak vidam vividhascha pratak chesta daivam chaivatra panchamam. So the place of action, the body, meaning so the body, the performer, the various senses, the different kinds of endeavor, and ultimately the super soul. These are the 5 factors of action. So the idea I wanted to get at with this, I wanted to convey with this verse was especially this last point here, that ultimately the super soul. While we can do our endeavor, while we can strive to associate with a pure devotee, get associated with someone who has a higher taste than us, while we can engage in Panchanga Bhakti, ultimately coming to this highest point of completely understanding that you're the soul, that also has to ultimately come from Krishna's mercy, or the mercy of a pure devotee. And so that's why there's such a big emphasis on associating with pure devotees, spending time with them, learning from them, serving them. Because when you please the pure devotees, it says Mad Bhakta Puja Vyadika in the 11th canto, Krishna is ultimately pleased very much when you please his pure devotees. So to come back to answer your question in short, we have to remember to act according to our position. We have to remember that yes, we can do our endeavor. We can always associate with pure devotees. That ultimately the mercy has to come from the pure devotee and from Krishna to get to this highest level of realizing that we're the soul, not the body. Does that help? Does that address the question?
Well said, Yogadish. Thank you for a beautiful class.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yogadis, for the beautiful class. It was very engaging. I joined towards the end. I was watching on YouTube and I joined towards the end. And then I will go back and watch it again because the last few slides I really liked it. So I will also share with my daughter. So very nice class. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mataji. Maybe a last call for questions if there are any questions, concerns, clarifications, or corrections.
Sorry, I was speaking on mute. Anyone else
Yeah.
had any question, any comments, feedback, encouragement, praise, anything is okay. That's what Yogadis Prabhu said. You can fire any kind of missiles at him and he's fine with it. So one point I wanted to bring out was, I think there is a very interesting question which Halayuda Kripa Prabhu asked.
Mm-hmm.
And just to repeat the question, he asked that there are still devotees who are not at that stage, but then they are also engaged in sense gratification, right? Many of us are, myself is. And that is because you have answered that question in your slides actually. The simple answer there is actually conviction. We have not reached that level of conviction where we say this is all in all, this pure devotional service is all in all. Although theoretically we have accepted it, in our heart we have not accepted that yet.
Yeah.
And so we feel that, hey, if something good has to come out from this devotional service, that's great. But what if it doesn't? Why I should miss out on the pleasures of this world? So that is actually what forces us, and that means that person, and myself included, I have not reached that level of conviction yet that the pure devotional service is the only thing and nothing else matters. Just like, Prahlad Maharaj.
Mm-hmm.
His teachers kept on teaching all kinds of subjects, but he said those things don't matter basically. The main thing which matters is the holy name, chanting the holy name. Nothing else actually matters. So he was 100%, had that conviction, convinced or had conviction, whatever you want to call that. So you had your answer actually in your slides there, direct answer to that question. But
Yeah.
whatever you gave, that other answer also was correct. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it shows how little conviction I have, that even though the answer is right there in the slides, I just couldn't find it right there myself.
No. The other yeah, actually you gave reference to some other verses, and those are also correct. Those answers are also correct. But excellent presentation, very good presentation you did. You covered a lot of material in 1.5 hours, and you connected all of them very well. So if anyone goes back, he'll be able to connect the dots. That's an excellent. It shows you presented the whole thing very, and it is a difficult topic. It's not an easy topic, but you tried to cover, and you presented it quite well. Anyone else? Okay, I will just do a quick check online in case someone has said anything in Facebook or YouTube or in our Google Sheets. No, we are good. I think very lively discussion. It's 8:30, top of the hour. So we will now close it. वाञ्छा कल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। योगाधीश प्रभु की जय, शिला प्रभुपाद की जय,
Prabhupada
गौर
Jai.
भक्त की जय।
Jai.
Thank you, dear devotees, for joining, taking time from your busy schedule and joining in the middle of the week the online only class from ISV. We do have classes in temple. In the morning, it starts at 8 o'clock Saturday, and in the evening on Sunday, 3:30 to 5:30. Please do join. Please do come to our temple and have association of devotees there. Hare Krishna. We will now close this session.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.